our 5th edition. Very happy to be with those 3 fantastic panelists that I'll be presenting in a minute. Je vais prendre un peu de temps pour mettre en contexte les discuter et comprendre si c'est votre première rencontre avec nous. Donc, j'explique toujours un peu le contexte de ces activités et je vais expliquer de façon très succincte pour qu'on puisse entrer dans la discussion avec nos panélistes. I want to make sure that we have a chance to have that conversation. L'objectif de ces événements pour les discuter et comprendre, c'est de fournir des espaces où on peut apprendre, réfléchir et co-construire nos connaissances et notre compréhension des enjeux qui sont liés à la DEIA avec les gens de notre organisation. Donc, cet espace de co-construction et de co-apprentissage est important au niveau du développement de nos nouvelles connaissances dans le cadre de notre travail au sein de l'organisation pour plus d'équité et d'inclusion pour la diversité humaine. Donc, c'est vraiment un espace de dialogue, mais vous n'êtes pas obligé de prendre la parole, évidemment. Si vous êtes confortable à écouter, vous êtes les bienvenus. On voulait faire des événements qui ne sont pas très formels, ce n'est pas des cours, ce n'est pas des webinaires, et il n'y a pas de présentation PowerPoint. We're having a conversation, so that's why we say you're welcome to join. Write in the chat, raise your hand at some point in the conversation if you want to reflect with us. So this is, grosso modo, c'est l'objectif des rencontres. On va essayer de terminer aux alentours de 12h55 pour vous permettre de continuer dans votre après-midi. Ce qu'on vous propose au niveau du déroulement, c'est de commencer avec, on a préparé des questions avec les 3 panélistes que je vais présenter dans un instant. Et ce qu'on veut faire, c'est pouvoir mettre la table sur le sujet d'aujourd'hui qui est l'appartenance en milieu de travail, belonging to spaces. So we're going to talk about that a little bit with the panelists at the beginning of the conversation, but then you're welcome to join in, as I said before, if you want to share reflections, bring different perspectives to the table. The idea here is not to have a monolithical way of thinking about these questions, but it's really to bring our perspectives together and push the reflection and be really curious and pondering on those issues. So for sure, to do that, we want to make sure that we're consequent and coherent and that we do that in an inclusive manner. So I will invite you to try to be mindful to be mindful of being inclusive in the way you bring your perspective and maybe use it from your perspective you want to share. Maybe I will say it in French just because it's easier for me, mais peut-être de façon à ouvrir le dialogue, on vous inviterait à présenter et Christina va mettre dans le chat quelques suggestions, mais on vous invite, c'est ça, à présenter vos points de vue, vos questions de façon à ouvrir le dialogue et non à lancer une polémique, à parler évidemment au jeu et donc à faire attention au choix de langage qu'on utilise, mais on a quelques autres petits points dans le chat à ce sujet-là. Donc, la session est enregistrée parce qu'on veut pouvoir permettre aux gens de notre communauté interne seulement de pouvoir l'écouter de façon asynchrone. A lot of people couldn't join, so we're really mindful that they'd like to participate. This is why it's recorded, but it's only for the internal community, which is students, employees, managers, and volunteers. So today I will have I'm going to jump right in and introduce Darla Fortune. She's an associate professor in applied human sciences at Concordia University. Darla's research focuses on practices of inclusion and experiences of belonging, particularly within community leisure spaces. She's interested in developing broader perspective of inclusion and working toward enhancing experiences of belonging for individuals who may be at risk of being stigmatized and excluded. Bienvenue, Darla. Welcome.
Thank you. Thank you. Nice to be here.
Elizabeth Rampersad is a research assistant and a master's student in social work at University of Strathclyde in Glasgow, Scotland. She worked with the DIB team as a research assistant and has conducted a literature review on belonging. And so it was super interesting that she was, and I was very grateful that she was able to be available directly from Scotland to talk with us today as a panelist to share what she found on that literature review journey on belonging. Welcome, Elizabeth.
Thank you for having me.
Pascal Legros La dernière et non la moindre, conseillère cadre, promotion de la civilité et prévention du harcèlement au CIUS du Centre-Ouest de Montréal, de l'île de Montréal, donc chez nous. Initialement formée en intervention psychosociale, Pascal a œuvré sur le terrain auprès de différentes populations en difficulté d'adaptation avant de réorienter sa carrière et de retourner aux études en droit. Après avoir obtenu un baccalauréat combiné en droit civil et en common law de l'Université McGill, elle a été reçue au barreau de l'Ordre du Québec. Elle a été reçue au tableau de l'Ordre du barreau du Québec et a travaillé au sein de différentes organisations en droit du travail, ainsi qu'en prévention et gestion donc de la civilité. Elle s'est jointe au CIUS du Centre-Ouest de l'île de Montréal en juillet 2019 au sein de l'équipe responsable de la gestion des plaintes de harcèlement et de la promotion de la civilité en milieu de travail. Elle est aujourd'hui conseillère cadre et elle est profondément engagée envers la possibilité de faire une réelle différence dans la vie des travailleurs de la santé. Bienvenue, Pascal. Très contente de vous avoir toutes les trois. So I'm not going to keep score of the chat. So Christina, you're going to help me with that if anything. Pour ceux qui ne connaissent pas Christina Chapelle, elle est spécialiste en procédés administratifs. Elle travaille dans l'équipe de la diversité, équité, inclusion et appartenance. Very, very lucky to have her. So we're going to start the conversation, and I'm very glad that we can have this conversation on belonging because, you know, it's part of the acronym we chose in CIUS du Centre-Ouest. Like, it's part of the diversity, equity, inclusion, and belonging. And it was super important when we started the initiative to think about how is that going to come out, you know, which acronym are we going to use and what's the meaning behind it? So it's not an accident that we have belonging in the title of our own initiative in the CIUS. And part of this concept of belonging is at the heart of our organizations. Whoops. Je vais inviter ceux qui se joignent à se mettre sur sourdine. I'm going to ask you to mute yourself if you can. So belonging is at the heart also of the work that's been done in organizations. We want to make sure we have the people we need to deploy our mission as an organization. And so in order to do that, we need to attract them, but we also need to retain them. L'idée donc appartenir à son milieu de travail, c'est étroitement lié dans la littérature aussi à l'engagement envers sa profession, envers son équipe, envers ses membres d'équipe. Donc, il y avait quelque chose de très, très important pour moi de l'inclure dans l'acronyme même, dire diversité, équité, inclusion et appartenance, parce que ça nous prend assez d'appartenance pour développer, déployer, puis être intentionnel dans des comportements inclusifs et équitables avec ses collègues, avec les membres de son équipe. Et la résultante de se sentir inclus et de se sentir traité équitablement, c'est d'appartenir à son milieu. So we're going to jump right in because I'm really happy we get that chance. And Elizabeth, I had a question for you. Given that you did a lit review on belonging for the DIB team, can you tell us how in research, how the research is defining this concept of belonging? I'm curious about that.
Yeah, so when I was conducting the literature review, we wanted to kind of draw on perspectives from an interdisciplinary range. And so we looked at what sociology was saying, what psychology was saying, what organizational management was saying about belonging, because given that we're working in the CIUS, it's really relevant to take that perspective. And to some people, it might seem a bit more obvious, but what the literature was saying is that we as individuals all have an inherent need to seek out belonging in our communities. And we do this by forming an affiliation with others, with a group, because we're at our core aiming to feel accepted and valued by the organizations we're working within. And psychology was really emphasizing that this is also coming out of a fear of being isolated, rejected, and once again putting on that other side of the scale, feeling very othered in our diverse communities. And so from an organizational stance, I think what was really highlighted is this need to feel like we are valued members of the community we're working for, and that our opinions matter in shaping the collective idea and message that we're putting forth as an organization. So that's kind of to give a bit of a jumpstart idea.
Okay, thanks so much.
Yeah.
I'm going to reiterate, and I'm going to reiterate for the participants who joined in. You know, this is a conversation we're wanting to have, and we have our three panelists who will give us informed knowledge. And so, if you have questions, you have the chat, and you can also raise your hand, and we want the conversation to be rolling. So, thank you so much. I wonder if Darla, you would like to add anything to what Elizabeth just presented.
Sure. Thanks. Well, you know, a lot of my research on belonging has actually been in leisure settings, so I just need to preface it with that. Not so much workspaces, although I see some definitely some overlap there. Much like Elizabeth said, though, I think it really does come down to this feeling of being valued, you know, being respected, finding a fit with other people, with other groups or environments, and certainly, you know, as Elizabeth also highlighted, there's challenges with that, particularly when individuals feel different, you know, or are made to feel that way and not easily finding that fit. So certainly it is at the core of it about that feeling of value and respect that we get when we're in, you know, again, finding a bit of a fit with others.
Mm-hmm. But exactly.
Oh,
I think
We
it
can't
cut
hear
out.
you.
we lost you. We lost sound there for a minute, I think.
Can you hear me now?
It's faint. It's faint. It's in the background.
Okay, is that better?
A little.
For the second.
Hopefully this is better.
Yeah,
better.
that's good.
Yes?
Yes.
Okay. All right. So I wanted to dig a little deeper on that. So can you help us understand how stigmatized social identities influences one's sense of belonging?
Sure. Yes, that's what I have found at, you know, often my research focuses on individuals that may be at risk of exclusion or not feeling that sense of belonging. And, you know, I've often asked the question where they find it, how they find it, things like that. So stigma, of course, involves, you know, labeling, stereotyping, really, you know, contributes to that sort of loss of status for individuals or discrimination of individuals, and certainly which leads to feelings of exclusion or actual exclusion in many cases. It's often common for stigmatized individuals to actually internalize those feelings themselves and perhaps even self-stigmatize, or, you know, stay away from environments where they don't feel like they will be accepted or welcomed, and, you know, buy into that idea that their identity comes with this sort of devaluing or, you know, a devalued status attached to that. So it really can be a challenge to find fit when, you know, you feel that way. And it's really at the heart of that, I think, is misunderstanding and misunderstandings about difference, right? And you know, thinking that other people, just based on differences, that we may come to devalue in some sense because we don't understand, you know, other people as well, or don't have those opportunities to interact across difference and perceived difference often.
Yes, that's a good point. Perceived difference. I see Elizabeth wants to jump in.
Yeah, I was actually going to say I really like what you're saying about the fact that then the stigma will be self-internalized. This kind of speaks to some of what was looked at in terms of belonging in the organizational setting. There was a lot of talk about how when members of the work community don't feel like they belong or matter in their work environment, they're less likely to want to put forward more effort. And so there's the higher rate of quitting and just less productive. I don't want to say output because that sounds very capitalist of me just to say that. But I think it's just there's a less of an inclination to be motivated and to, like you're saying, want to be a part of the group, and then you'll self retract from the environment.
Yes.
And Pascal, would you like to add anything?
Sure. I just wanted to say that what Darla was saying about people avoiding certain settings or saying, you know, this is not a place for me, I'm not going to be accepted. This is already something that can be quite detrimental in a leisure setting. But imagine in a workplace where you don't really have the choice to be, because of course we get to choose our employers. some of us get to choose our employers when we're lucky, but most people have to work. Most people have to be in those spaces where they might unfortunately not feel that their not innate, but personal characteristics are accepted, or that there is a stigma attached to what is the essence of them. So I think this a discussion like this one is all the more important in a workplace context where
Oh, Pascal,
Oh,
you're muted.
sorry, my computer's just doing things on its own today. People. So I was just saying that it's all the more interesting to have discussions like these in spaces where people can't really decide that I'm going to avoid this space because I don't feel like I belong. I have to be there, and I have to bring my whole self there all the time and face that perceived non-acceptance or nonsense of belonging.
And I think that's interesting. Je vais le dire en français pour les gens de nos participants qui sont plus francophones, mais sentez-vous bienvenue. On parle en anglais, mais on peut le faire en français si vous voulez poser des questions ou intervenir en français aussi. Ça amène aussi la question de, and I'm going to say it in English for Dala as well, la question du masking, right? So masking, hiding, concealing identities. In some cases, when we talk about diversity, we're not going to go into detail of that concept, but there is such a thing as visible diversity and invisible diversity markers, right? And so some markers may not be apparent. Il y a des marqueurs identitaires qui sont invisibles et qui peuvent permettre à des individus au travail de cacher ces identités-là. C'est un peu ce que la recherche démontre, c'est que ce travail-là d'éviter puis de cacher ces identités, c'est extrêmement coûteux. Ça coûte aux individus. It's costly in terms of mental energy. It's costly in terms of the constant triggering of the nervous system. Alors, il y a une réflexion aussi à avoir sur ça. Je ne sais pas si quelqu'un a le goût de réagir à ça. Pascal?
Can I react to that again? Ça m'a fait juste penser au concept de code switching, qui est quelque chose que probablement en fait, je dirais, it is detrimental. It can be detrimental on somebody's sense of belonging, but ça a aussi un impact psychologique quand même assez lourd sur les gens qui sentent l'obligation de faire du code switching, que ce soit consciemment ou inconsciemment. Dans un autre sens, j'ai envie de dire que c'est les gens qui sont capables de faire ce code switching-là, they are rewarded by the environment. They're more accepted, they feel like they belong more. So that behavior is encouraged, c'est récompensé. Puis ceux qui sont pas capables de le faire for whatever reason, ils sont encore plus stigmatisés, and they end up kind of involuntarily confirming stereotypes that, maybe the dominant culture or people from the dominant culture may have about them. Puis, donc, l'idée de code switching, d'un côté, on se rend compte que ça a des conséquences, des impacts négatifs, mais d'un autre côté, ça permet un peu, d'une certaine façon, d'éviter des problèmes, mais ça met l'accent aussi sur ceux qui sont pas capables de le faire. Et ça it puts them under the microscope all the more.
Yeah, and that brings me a lot of desire to ask more questions. And before I do that, I want to take what you just mentioned, Pascal, and bring it to Darla's research reality. Is this something that you encountered in your research, the costs and the gains of code switching or concealing identities, or different concepts are related to this, some avoidance mechanism or some protective mechanisms?
Yes, yeah, absolutely. But also, the one point I think that stood out for me there, from what I'm hearing so far, in terms of the differences between leisure and workspaces. But I think, again, the transferability, generally when people do find spaces where they feel belonging and a sense of, fit and things like that, they tend to take pride in those spaces and feel a bit of a sense of ownership. I've often heard in relationship to community centers, or even, spaces like art museums or community art spaces where, people have said to me, this is my club, this is my space, and they take an active role in contributing to that. So in a leisure setting, you don't tend to think about that like you might in a workspace, but where, they take ownership for, welcoming new members into that space, or providing hospitality, wanting, if programs are continuous week after week, they tend to want to take an active role in, bringing refreshments, or, contributing in whatever ways that looks like for certain individuals. So when they do feel like that, that they're appreciated in that space and valued in that space, there is that more of an effort, I think, on individuals to make it have a bit of shared ownership and shared mutual responsibility, I would say. So that's a really positive thing, I think, that I see in leisure spaces, but that transfers over really well into workspaces also,
Yeah.
obviously. And
Absolutely. And I like that, active role and ownership. I think,
yes.
Ultimately in organizations, no matter what the mission is, this is what we wish for everyone to experience, right? So I don't know, Elizabeth, in your literature review, what you found that was, maybe you want to speak to something. I see you want to share something, and then I have a question for you, so I'm going to keep it.
Well, I like the mention of this idea of ownership. I think that was really highlighted, was this idea, like, as being part of the series, having a shared mission, having people from all walks of life, all different backgrounds, feeling like they have a part in this mission and believe in it as well, and feel accepted in it. I think also comes only when, also at the same time, on the managerial side, when they're taking notice of employees' ideas and what they have to say as well in creating a collective mission. Do you know what I mean? So I think this was brought up in a few cases where organizations on a smaller scale, smaller level, when they were changing up and putting forward mission statements, they were collaborating with their workers so that everyone felt like they had a stake in the work that they were doing and felt like they were an important aspect to creating this workplace mentality. So yeah, that's how I could kind of add to the.
Okay, thank you. And I'm going to take that opportunity to say this is what we're aiming to do at CS Centre West, right? The whole strategy of the DIB initiative is to do this bottom up and to work with empirical data and to work with the communities and with the employees to be informed by their experiences and their knowledge and their expertise. Et c'est pour ça qu'on a un comité des EIA. Puis là, je vois pas toute la liste des participants aujourd'hui, mais je sais que Catherine est là, qui est sur notre comité consultatif. Et l'idée des différents lieux de participation qu'on propose, c'est pour ça. C'est pour dire, non seulement votre voix est importante, vos connaissances, votre expertise, votre perspective sont toutes importantes, parce qu'un CIUS de 34 sites, c'est énorme. On a beaucoup de points d'angle morts. How can we benefit from your intelligence and become collectively more intelligent as an organization? And we want to value that. And this is why we craft the space in such a way that people can participate and that we make it bottom up. And we're going to co-create a DI policy. We're going to co-create our first action plan. And most organizations, they just don't do that because it takes much longer and it's much more effort than to say, let's sit down, 20 people, let's write that policy. Alors, habituellement, c'est pas par mauvaise intention que les organisations fonctionnent comme ça, c'est par souci d'efficacité. Mais dans notre organisation, on s'est dit, nous, oui, l'efficacité, évidemment, on est d'accord, on est dans le réseau de la santé, là. Tout le monde est obsédé par l'efficacité. That's not the point. We also have to, if we want to get real results, we have to do things in a different way, because more of the same, I always say that more of the same is going to bring us more of the same. If we want different result, let's put different process in place. And this is why in the DIB initiative, well, we try to do that, but it's a beginning, on commence. Alors, je vais le dire avec excitation, mais un peu de humilité aussi. Et là, je vais voir une question dans le chat qui dit, can belonging mean the prerequisite to opportunity? Et je suis pas sûre que je comprends bien la question, so I'm going to try to reframe my understanding, but Susan, if you feel like you want to jump in, you can unmute yourself and jump in.
Hi.
Hi, Susan.
Hi.
Welcome.
Thanks. It's great to have the opportunity to be here. I guess what I meant by that is that if there is a segment of a group, people who might self-exclude, then perhaps when larger plans are considered, then they wouldn't necessarily be part of a group to participate if there are opportunities for new projects or things like that.
So as one of the
That's
panelists would,
that's what I meant. So sorry, that's what I meant, because when you don't self-exclude, or you don't self-exclude when you feel you belong,
Mhm.
and that's what and then we lose talent.
Yeah.
You
Yeah.
know, we lose talent when that person who self-excludes has something. Obviously, everybody has value to contribute.
Yeah.
So that's the thing. So that everyone's ideas can be seen
Mhm.
and considered. We're all the richer for it. So that quiet person that doesn't say anything at the meeting. Have we
Yes.
ever been there where we see that? So
Mhm.
that's kind of what I mean.
And it's interesting. I'm going to jump on that, and you can keep the mic open if you'd like to keep talking. And I'm inviting the panelists as well, and everyone is invited. We are trying to have this inclusive space, but as the question of the space we do, let's just say this example of having some people in meetings who don't speak up. So I'm thinking at the moment of how the spaces in organization designed to be inclusive and to foster belonging, right? So what do we do to make sure that the meeting is not just designed for people who are outspoken and think quickly? Because sometimes that's also the design we put people in. I'm presenting you something, you need to decide right now and give me your best idea right away. And so the person who's more of a different thinker and needs to reflect, needs the 30-minute by themselves, and could come up with the best idea, doesn't have that opportunity in terms of the space is not designed for that. So often we think, especially if I'm just going to reflect on higher education, how we foster we build spaces for the most outspoken students, right? And so we evaluate in that perspective as well. So how can we, in the workplace, comment est-ce qu'on peut réfléchir à des espaces qui sont inclusifs de toutes les façons? Là, on pourrait parler de neurodiversité, mais on pourrait aussi parler de tenure, right? If you're a new employee versus someone who has tenure, how is the space designed for everyone to have a voice and not to feel like they have to be in for 2 years before they can give an idea, right? Parce que ça aussi, c'est une façon de, we're onboarding you because you have something to bring to us, but we're not using it. Or we're onboarding you for your differences, and we're actually, we're hiring you for your differences, but we're onboarding for similarities, right? So we're on board, on attire ou on engage des gens pour leur plus-valeur qu'on n'utilise pas finalement. Alors, il faut réfléchir à ça, comment on fait sentir aux gens qui peuvent contribuer puis qui sont valorisés. And I don't know if the panelists have something they'd like to react to on this conversation. Darla, I see you.
I've been thinking a lot about this, and I'm sort of going off the cuff here because this is but it does remind me of previous research that I've done in the area of culture change, particularly in long-term care. So it wasn't really planning on bringing that to the table today, but it seems to fit. But I think one thing that I have been thinking about hearing these comments about particularly quiet people at meetings or not being asked, I think the two things that come to mind. One is the importance of inviting, reaching out and inviting. And I think that comes from getting to know people on a different level. Well, certainly when you enter an organization, ideally you're hired for a reason. You bring something to the table. Somebody recognized something in you to hire you in the first place. So there's that. But I think over time you also get to know people's strengths and weaknesses in certain areas, and taking the time to build relationships among colleagues is really, really crucial to that. And then when you discover people's their capacities and their strengths, use them, invite them, and create those opportunities to reach out, not putting people on the spot, of course, but because the last thing we'd want to do as well is create or believe that we're creating opportunities when they're really sort of tokenistic gestures that are not so meaningful. So if you're really looking for ways to use people's capacities, I think it's in a meaningful way, you know. So those are just some of my initial thoughts around that. But
yeah, thank you for that. And that brings us back to having an active role and being having ownership. Elizabeth.
I actually think if you don't mind, I can actually speak to this actually from a context in Scotland, so a little bit farther away from talking about the research related, but just as something I've realized now, being in an environment working with people in Scotland, there is a bit of a different culture. I thought it was interesting what you said, Christine, about higher education being kind of designed for for outspoken people who want to give their opinions more publicly, whereas the culture here has been a bit different. You'll have people who have 20 years work experience, 10 years work experience, 2 years work experience, all in the same room, but no one really wants to speak up because the culture is not to be loud, the culture is not to be more flashy. And so something that they've kind of switched around to doing in meeting settings is, you know, turn to your colleague. How about you guys have a discussion first about what you're both thinking about, I don't know, whatever the topic that's given. And then some spokespeople who feel more comfortable and willing to speak on behalf and advocate for their other colleagues can, but then it gives a bit more of a comfortable setting in which that kind of connection and community can be built. And it also allows people to get to know their colleagues a bit more and see how they're feeling in their work environment, in their workspace. So I just thought that was interesting because it was a very different environment and outlook to what I'm used to in the North American setting of like work and education.
Yeah, thank you for that. I see we have Nathanael who raised their hand.
Yes, I just wanted to touch on that question of just being who has access to the meetings and who has access to the space. And I want to talk about like a specific case, but what I'm talking about is really like the issue of physical disability in healthcare, because I'm physically disabled, and I'm physically disabled because I have long COVID. So COVID caused the physical disability in myself. And because of this, it means that I have to do a lot of work online because the workplace is not always safe for me. If there are no measures to control the transmission of viruses, now that my immune system is lessened, this could mean really serious consequences for me. So it means that in a lot of times I have to decide whether I can go to a meeting, right? It means I have to decide whether I can do a support group that I really want to facilitate. Am I going to be given the opportunity to do it online? Am I going to be given the opportunity of talking about COVID measures without being ostracized? And this issue is not just limited to me, it's also limited to a lot of others healthcare workers. Like I've talked to a lot of former nurses, former medical staff who also have sequelae from COVID, who have had to stop working because they were not able to access sufficient accommodations, or in some cases, no accommodations could have made work possible for them. And I just, I'm seeing all those messages from the CEOs, about like unmasking the future and all those things. And I understand that COVID is extremely traumatizing. I really understand on a personal level, but we're not just putting staff at risk, we're also putting patients at risk. And I find that in healthcare, we don't really want to talk about physical disability. And I think it's a detriment not just to our own staff, it's also a detriment to the patients. Because if everyone in the medical team is able-bodied and does not have an experience of disability, how can we hope to understand what the patients are going through? And how can we hope to minimize the risk of medical neglect and medical abuse, right? And I just wanted to say that it's important to think about that, because there are so many meetings that I physically cannot go to, and in which my voice is not even there to begin with. And even if I am outspoken, and I'm very lucky that I am, and I have that privilege of being very comfortable in speaking up. But in a lot of places, I'm not even there physically, and people don't see me. And that makes a lot of difference, because they don't see my walker, they don't see my crutch, they don't see my physical disability, because if I'm sitting at the computer, I don't look disabled. But as soon as I'm going to get up, I'm going to look disabled. You see what I mean? So I just wanted to touch on that, because it's something that I haven't seen a lot of people. I'm also sitting at other intersections where people talk about transphobia, people talk about Islamophobia, and those are things that I've been able to build alliances with other people. But on the topic of physical disability, especially in the context of an ongoing pandemic, I will say that's the one thing where I'm not finding a lot of conversations happening.
And I want to thank you for bringing all of this up. And I think there's a lot of element to what you're bringing to the table, and I'm very appreciative of that. I'm going to say a couple of things, and then I'm going to pass the mic to the panelists as well. But like we could do a D&D, and maybe we should, on the topic of disability or disabling situation in itself. That's for those of you who don't know, I'm a researcher in inclusion for people who are in French in a disabling situation, using the social model of disability, and I've worked in that research in that field for 10 years. And so this is something that is for sure unspoken, as you said. Je vais dire en français juste parce que ça va être plus facile pour moi, mais le champ du handicap de façon générale est toujours une question de diversité qui est négligée, mise de côté. We have to remember that disability entails a lot of stuff, and that is misunderstood. It brings up the question of social representation. How do we understand disability? What we make of it in our own mind, the way we were socialized around disability, the values, the attitudes, the charge that we associate with our mental representation of what is someone who has a disability, or understanding of it. It's part of the DEI work to try to promote a conversation where we can try to be curious about other identities. We all have our own, we're harboring different identities. So the idea, I'm just brainstorming here, but there's a lot of things around that I'm very appreciative for you to bring, because yes, I think it comes back to equity in terms of access to space, access to opportunities, the opportunity to sometimes have your disability invisibilized by the technology, let's say, that can be having positive effects, but it can also harbor detrimental effects if you can't be in some spaces and bring your best self to those spaces. So thank you so much for that perspective. I don't know if someone in the panel, Darla, Elisabeth, Pascal.
Actually, what this made me think about is the fact that because now we know a lot more about neurodiversity, people can, I want to say, obtain diagnosis about their own neurodiversity more accessibly than before. So we have more employees that present characteristics in that aspects. And the question for me, and it's something I'm thinking about. It's a reflection I have. I don't have the solution, but how do we make sure that some of these people for whom social interactions are a challenge, or social interactions in the way that we do them in our culture are a challenge? How do we make sure that they feel that they belong in part of a team when going for instance, when going for lunch together is a source of stress for them, rather than what it is meant to be for the more neurotypical people, a situation where you're going to get to know your colleagues, where you're going to try to increase the sentiment of belonging, whereas for them it's going to be a situation where they are feeling even more stigmatized or even more inadequate. How do we make sure that these colleagues that we have and that are more and more, it's more and more, I mean, c'est de plus en plus possible pour nous de savoir que ces collègues-là ont un diagnostic de ce genre-là, parce que c'est plus facile pour eux d'avoir le diagnostic aussi. Il y a peut-être 20, 30 ans, beaucoup de ces personnes-là pourraient être tout simplement « Oh, je suis bizarre » ou « c'est mon collègue bizarre » ou whatever. Maintenant, on est capable de mettre une étiquette, une vraie étiquette dessus. Donc, ces gens-là sont de plus en plus présents dans nos organisations. So how do we make sure that, we create a space for them to belong in the way that we interact socially? Mm-hmm. I don't have the answer.
I really appreciate this. I just want to name something that I think is important here, which is I really appreciate that there's more awareness about mental health, about neurodiversity. That is something that I really care about, and I love that there is more people thinking about it, about inclusion, about accommodations. But I've noticed that every time that I talk about physical disability, the conversation always goes back to neurodiversity. And the thing is that the experience of those things are extremely different. And I know from experience it's completely different. So what I want people to think of is like, how many visibly physically disabled coworkers do you have? How many, like when you walk into a hospital or a clinic, the people are physically disabled. And it's been interesting to me that when I walk into some of the workspaces that I go to, people identify me as a patient because I have a walker. People don't identify me as staff. And that's been like kind of like a constant thing that I've noticed. So I just want us to be careful when we talk about disability, that not all disabilities function the same way. And by kind of amalgamating all the expenses of disability, most of the time it's the expense of physical disability that gets forgotten about, right? And I just wanted to name that real quick.
Yeah. Thank you for that. I really appreciate the scope of this conversation. Darla, would you like to add something? I saw you wanted to react.
I think my thought going by earlier, but I could jump in a little bit here. I don't think I have any answers necessarily, but I do think, I can, considering the importance, and so certainly that point around that there are differences between, physical disabilities and obviously neurodiversity and other types of, but at the same time, I'm thinking there's so many differences that we do encounter in the workspace that it's necessary to make room for all of it, I think. And part of that I think stems from having conversations with individuals as to how they would, how do you want to contribute? How can we, what could we change about this for you to make an impact or to contribute in a way that you really want to? I think asking those questions is really key across the board. So I know I'm not being specific necessarily to physical disability, but at the same time, I think that would be inclusive of, of physical disabilities as well as mental health challenges or what have you. I think if people are, again, having meeting spaces that, just the simple answer of having them online doesn't always meet those needs for everyone, but certainly mixing things up and not assuming that in person is always the way to go or online fixes everything or, whatever. But and if people can't be, physically present at a meeting for one reason or another, I think, making the effort to reach out and say, this isn't a meeting that we really want your contribution. We want to hear your voice. How can we do that? So I do think that the discussion is hugely important because we don't have all the answers in all the situations. But I think it's incumbent upon us to try to reach out to people and work together to find them.
Yeah, and I think, that makes me think organizational efforts in general towards, let's say, physical disability. It's not, usually it's not to its max, we cover the bases. There's accessibility ramps. We do this here and there. There's a plan d'action, but, how can we move the needle in a constructive, intentional, productive, inclusive, equitable way? Like how can we be raising the bar for that to happen? Because what Nathanael is bringing up is also the question of being outside the norm, whatever norm means. It's a very normative conversation to say, and it's true that is influencing the way the workspace is operating, right? So we have to be mindful of that and think about that. And I see there's a hand up and I want to take it, but I want to say we have, in one of the spaces we created in DIB, there's a working group on the question of disability or accessibility need in the CS, and we're collectively working with, we send calls to all so that everyone can join. Even if you want to come for one meeting, that's okay. So I'm also inviting everyone here today to come and help us map out obstacles and challenges regarding disability and accessibility needs in our CS. So we have engaged participants. We have over 40 people who have participated so far from different places in the CIUS. But if you want to join and participate, we can send you the next meeting because that's what we want to make happen. How can we be more intentional? Disability touches a lot of people. So I'm not going to go with the stats. I want to take the hand up. Raquel, hopefully I'm saying your name right.
Yes.
Welcome.
Yes, I was thinking. Thank you. I was thinking of the previous comment, and I think the point of there's so much talking and interest on neurodiversity because in the other side of the coin that Nathanael was commenting, when there's physical disability, something you see is easy to spot, and then the question is how you deal with it. How avoid to discriminate, to make assumptions. This is question of education, but you don't need disclosure when it's about neurodiversity or disabilities that touching the health, mental health. Then people don't walk around with the label saying, I have this problem, or I suffer from this disease, or I am, I'm recovering from burnout. So, and people don't do that, and you can ask people to disclose either. So, the point is trying to develop a space without asking people specific questions, how to try to develop that environment for people to be more open where the difference is. And in doing so, you can include those people and take the best of them. Some people maybe have problems with, I don't know, just for saying something, obsessive compulsive behavior, just for saying something. Those people may be very good at some things, because they can concentrate 100% on something. Without distraction. I'm saying whatever because I have no clue what I'm saying, but you can always take the best of everyone in a team.
Yeah.
So I think that's all the point about so much talking about neurodiversity. But in doing so, I think the mentality change in all senses. So it's not like because you're addressing specifics about neurodiversity that open your mind for people with physical disabilities too. So I think it's the same package. The difference is that is maybe more difficult to address. And it's not going only about saying, okay, we have ramps for people to walk, or different bathrooms for people that are able to access. It goes beyond that, but you go one step at a time. So that's what I have to.
Thank you so much. And I guess it makes it clear what Raquel brought up to the surface, like how complex, right? The question regarding social identities, stigma, biases, social norms, normativity, it's all tied together somehow. How can we think of our spaces, to come back to the topic of today, the belonging in those spaces? We talked about some ingredients or key ingredients or indicators. I don't know if Darla, in your research, you have something that came up that was very clear about indicators of belonging or ingredients that are essential that we have not covered.
I think I might have spoken to some of those earlier with respect to the ownership piece, the feeling valued and contributing piece. But I think one thing I just wanted to, I guess, add to that around the research I've done and noticing the value of, and I think this is transferable across all environments really, but the value of any type of initiative that really promotes relationships and relationship building. And so, of course, we talk about that a lot in leisure spaces because that's what we're often there for, is to connect with others socially, that need to belong that Elizabeth highlighted earlier. We seek that out in our leisure time. But I think it's equally as important in our workspaces as well that, we're not going to be happy and we're not really going to get to the point of feeling that, our needs for belonging are met if we don't on some level build relationships with our colleagues as well in those workspaces. And so any initiative that has that goal in mind and that creates that space, I think, is really valuable in getting to know, one another outside of just your limited work role as well. I know that, it sounds very simple to do, like think that we should, maybe go out, for drinks after work or for lunch together or whatever, participate in some form of leisure activity, maybe book clubs, anything along those lines that are really social and bring people together in a number of different ways. And it kind of reminds me of, in some of my research, I draw upon Eric Kleinenberg's work on social infrastructure, again, more of a leisure space connection there, but he really does stress the importance of a recurrent contact, which happens, time and time again. We're lucky enough that we have that easily in workspaces because we do work together day in and day out. But conversations and connection around common passions and interests are really, really key. And I think, he often stresses just how valuable they are for connecting across difference, right? And seeing our sort of shared humanity. I think that's really huge in a work environment as well. If we're just about working together only, certainly there's a common interest there, a common goal that we're interested in or achieving together, but it's so much deeper when we can find other sources of commonality as well. And I think that comfort level that comes from that helps with belonging, because I think those, quieter people in meeting spaces or whatever, are perhaps probably less quiet if they're in a comfortable space with people that they've socialized with on a regular basis, that they've come to know outside of work or outside of the, confines of just working together on a specific task. So, so I just wanted to stress the importance of that, I think, as well.
Yes, and thank you for that. I think you're also bringing up our next topic for next month's D&D. I don't want to do a shameless plug here, but next month we'll be talking about safe space. What does it mean? For who is it a safe space? Who can say it's a safe space? We're going to be pondering around there, around that topic, because it's so important. It's tied to what you just mentioned in terms of, how can people show up and participate in spaces and shine or bring their best or be considered and feel like they belong. I want to say also, I think it's part of the DEIB scope and a systems view, and then I'd like to invite Elizabeth and Pascal to talk about their final thoughts. But how can we bring relationships to not stay on a transactional level, but to be transformative in the workplace, right? So that we transform through each other for the greater good of the organization's mission as well, right? If we're working in a clinical setting or in an admin setting, it doesn't matter. How can we transform through each other? And it's a bit of why we're doing the D&D, because we have to pass the transactional stage so we can really benefit from those relationships. So I don't know, Elizabeth or Pascal, if you feel like you want to jump in, or anyone participating with us today. I think there may be a question. Go ahead.
Can I go ahead?
Yes, for sure.
Okay. Sorry, just a few final thoughts. I'm not a researcher, so my knowledge of the topic is really maybe rooted on my groundwork, on what I do every day. So I don't have a lot of theoretical knowledge about the questions. But one thing I can say is that one of the strengths of our CUS is our cultural diversity. We are one of the CUSs where people from where we have the most diverse group of employees, whether it be ethnically or culturally or in terms of physical appearance and all of that. And it's a strength. We love it, but it comes with a lot of challenges. And I want to say that in terms of the situations that come to our desks, a lot of this cultural diversity that we love so much seems to be at the root of many of the issues that we have when it comes to feelings of being harassed, or feelings of being at the receiving end of microaggressions, feelings of really not fitting in, not being accepted, not being understood. I wanted to say that we touched upon it just briefly when we talked about code switching and that part of the conversation earlier. But I feel that, this is something that we have to keep in mind because, if I could even reach out to my colleague Rosalie, who is, with us today. Many of the issues that we encounter really are rooted at the bottom line, are rooted, in misunderstanding cultural mannerism or misunderstood ways of socializing. That's what I wanted to
And
mention.
just that is the question for an entire, la compétence interculturelle, juste ça, ça pourrait faire toute une discussion. Mais merci pour cette perspective, Pascal, c'est super intéressant. Puis là, ça me laisse avec plein de questions. Mais tu nous gardes en suspens, c'est bon. Elizabeth, do you have a final thought to share you'd like to share with us?
I guess kind of to tie into what you were talking about before with like, are there key ingredients? And what ended up coming out mainly in the research, and this is more of an optimistic view, obviously this is what we aim to achieve, but what the research all encompassing was hinting at is that when you can achieve an environment which has diversity, which the CEUS does have, but then also enables equity and fossilizes inclusion, the ultimate goal is to achieve belonging, and that would be the ultimate outcome. And so this is what they're saying, is that if you can actually have good DEI and that has a follow through in the end, then the outcome should be belonging. So
yeah.
I think this is where obviously Christine's hard work has been very important towards what we're aiming to achieve at the CEUS. And I think everyone knows that it'll be an ongoing process, and I think as long as everyone can maintain some stamina on all ends to uphold each other, then it should be possible in every environment, I think.
Thank you, Elizabeth. Thank you for that. I like to think about that and say that, first of all, it's not just my thing. It has to be everyone's thing, right? And I know you know that, and we joke about that. And we can only create equity, inclusion, and belonging together. That's the only way forward. Not one person, not one team, not one directorate. It can only be achieved together because it's interpersonal also. So anyway, I'm going to leave you on that. Darla, thank you so much for being with us.
Thank you. Thanks for the invitation. This was fun.
Yay, Elizabeth, Pascal, very grateful. We were very lucky to have you. Merci à Christina, merci à tout le monde qui était présent, qui ont enrichi les réflexions et les échanges. J'ai pas pu répondre, je pense, à tout du chat. J'ai encore des croûtes à manger pour mon animation Teams, mais je vous remercie de votre compréhension and thank you so much for being with us. We will be sending everyone an email after this Discuss and Digest with a link to an infographics, a capsule that Christina prepared that is also bringing documentation forward in tied to the topic of today. We will see you next month where we will talk about safe spaces, and we're very grateful for the participation today, everyone. I hope you'll come back with us next month. Merci.
Merci.
Thank you. Merci.
Thank you.